Ayin Beis, Volume 2. We're on page 1149. So let's. So I'm going to sum up what we learned yesterday, which was essentially is explaining the process. You can call it the production process, if you wish. It's really the creation process from a completely different and absolute reality to the existent reality that we know, which in the language of Chassidus is Yesh Hamiti to Yesh Hanivra, could not be more antithetical. And because there's a need for a relationship, and therefore we need an interface, so there's the Ayin Be'emtza, there's this channel in between, which is called Ayin, and we'll be discussing why it's called Ayin. But briefly, Ayin can mean several things. One is that it's completely bottled and nullified compared to its source. Ayin could also mean it's unknown and beyond us. So he explained that there's two levels of Ayin. The Ayin that relates and that is a reflection of the source of the Yesh Amiti is called the Ayin Amiti. And then there's the Ayin as it relates to existence. And he explained, to sum up briefly, that he's going to explain these two levels on many different ways. But right now, he's talking about how Lifnei had Simtsum, even pre-Simtsum, in the divine, we'll call it the divine consciousness, for lack of a better word, where built the Metzias Nimtza, Atzmus, in his purest form, has now chosen to manifest in a Metzias Nimtza, in some form of existential presence, not just a non-existential one. So that is the first stage, is a really called Atzmi, Etzma. He calls it Atzmi or Etzma. Both names are correct. It is the essence of what is, completely and utterly just a reflection of its source. So it makes total sense, because if it would leap immediately to a state that already relates to some identity and has some function, has some desire and some purpose, then it's not purely reflecting Atzmos. So it's true, even on the highest level, is not Atzmos, it's not the core, but on the other hand, it has nothing else but reflecting what the core is, what the essence is expressing. So that's the first level of Ayin. And he called that's not even a level you can call in the sense of Gili and Hamshacha. All it is not the pure, undiluted Atzmus. It's Atzmus reflecting in some form of Metzias Nimtza. That's what he calls it. It's Hamshacha mina Atzmus, but not a Hamshacha within itself. The example he gave for it was Keiches Atzmim in the Nefesh. The core faculties as they are in the soul, not as they are expressed, even in a concealed way. Definitely not in a revealed way. They're just the faculties of the core soul. And then the second level of Ayin is called Hispashtus Sa'er, not Etzemer, Hispashtus Sa'er. Here the Eir has an identity. And what is this identity? That is going to be the process which is going to relate to creating existence. It's still far from the actual creation process, but it is definitely associating now. And there's something that I could call the Eir, he says, some shaykhs. And he explained this connection through three levels of desire. In this Eir, he says, in this Eir, there we can talk about a Ratzon Klali, a general desire, a Ratzon Prati, which he explained, a general desire, even though it's already a stimulation but it's not something that can relate to anything actionable. It's just he wants. He knows that he wants, or he wants. He knows that he desires a desire. Sometimes it says that expression. So that's achlota. It's a resolve. It's a determination, and it comes after Yesodus. We're not talking about Ratzon HaMuchlat. He said that which is embedded in the core essence that is not yet in any way stimulated or revealed. Okay, right? That's Ratzon HaKol Yachlota. The Ratzon Prati is a stimulation, so to speak, but Ratzon Be'elim is now he wants to have specifics. He wants a world that will consist of Atzilus, Bria, and so on. And then there's the Ratzon HaKodum, that he says, that is the step right before it actually begins to be revealed into action. And that is what? There he envisions and allocates. Shir Atzmei, Ba'atzmei B'koyach Kol Ma She'aseh Lo Yizbapel. So based on Ratzon number 2, in Ratzon 3, third level, he's now actually allocating and defining and the specifics of what is going to be built. So there's a general desire for a home. There's a specific desire, what type of home. And then there's the desire that spells out what resources we will need to actually create this type of existence. And all this is in the hispashtus, in the extension of it.
You want to ask a question?
One minute. Let me finish the summary. Yeah. Okay, and these are the 2 levels of ayin. The 2 levels of ayin. One is a reflection of atzmus. So we have now like this. Yesh Amiti is atzmus. Mitzusim atzmus, built in Mitzias Nimtza, Mechuyev HaMitzias atzmus. Ayin Amiti is the closest possible reflection of this atzmus as it comes in the Mitzias Nimtza, and that's all it is. It's not functioning in any other way. Then comes the second ayin, the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. This is already the Oyer, as it's beginning to relate to the product, and the Yesh HaNivra is the actual product. In this case, it would be everything after the Tzimtzum. Even though he doesn't say that explicitly, but based on this way he's defining it right now. So there you have the source, you have the producer, the product, and the process in between, consisting of 2 steps. So what you have is an ayin that represents God to the best of its ability, as much as can do as a reflection, because it's a complete bittul to the source, but it's already in the world, in existence as we know it. So something is there. Then there is, when I say something, not something as we understand something, but I mean something that is in addition to atzmus in its purest form, expressing it in some nimtzadika way. And then there is the second ayin is, so to speak, represents the Yesh HaNivra, because it's it's still it's God's energy, but it's an energy that's beginning to relate to and will ultimately become the energy that will define and shape all of existence. Okay, that's a summary to what we learned in the middle of page 1149. You want to ask something? Go ahead.
Yes, if you don't mind. We said that it says in the text that the second level is She'ara B'Tzeinu Hatzil Livru. That sounds a little bit like Reish Hermanus de Malka. And if that's the case, then the Ratzon HaKodum might be the Shaira in the midst of that, before Tzimtzum. Is that possible to say?
First of all, I don't like to bring words that are not here. So since you're bringing an expression that's not here, I'm not going to address that because I have no clue. He's not this. That expression from Zohar that you just said has many interpretations, and he's not bringing them right here. So I would rather not speculate on that, even though there's plenty to be said on it. That's number one. Regarding Ratzon HaKodem Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, he says it explicitly. That's what he says. Ratzon HaKodem, read inside. Hu shekodem alagil, hu sheshir ba'atzmei b'koyach kol ma she'aseh li is b'poel. He says that that's exactly what he says.
Yes, I
The
read
Shir
that.
Atzmei, the envisioning and allocating, is exactly that, the Ratzon Kadam, which is not the Ratzon Prati. So
Okay, so that's okay. Fine, good. I wonder if you could, if you can learn that either way. Fine, good. Thank you.
I don't know. There's no other way. What do you mean other way? What other way is there to learn it?
Because it's it's not really Bapoil, but it's something he wants to boil. That could just be the Lahara, the Etzer Spheres of Gnusis. You don't want to use the terminology, but that
He's not using this terminology. Why are we trying to use it? What are you trying to establish?
I want to know if we're past Simpson or not.
No, but this is all Tzimtzum. He said clearly 2 levels of pre Lifnei at Tzimtzum.
Okay.
That's not even a question.
So then what could the Ratzon Kadum be, if not
Shir Atzmei B'Koyach?
That's the Lahara, that's the Spheres of Gnusis, because there's nothing else.
So first of all, who says the Spheres of Gnusis are, I told you yesterday, they're before the Tzimtzum.
Exactly. That's what you just said. We're all before the Tzimtzum, we're partially after Tzimtzum.
No, there's no after Tzimtzum here at all. I told you yesterday. It says clearly, Erein Sof Lifnei at Tzimtzum. He's talking Tula. Everything is before the Tzimtzum here. Where are you getting the Tzimtzum here?
Okay. So then if we could give a name to the Darga of the Mishayar, what would be Bapoil? Could we give it a name, a pre-Tzimtzum label designation?
That's the whole theme here is pre-Tzimtzum.
Okay.
That doesn't need any, that's what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. He's saying before the Tzimtzum, there's 2 levels in Ur, Etzem Ur and Ispashtus Ur. And in Ispashtus Ur, he explained 3 levels in Ratzon.
Perfect. Okay.
This is Pshat. This is it's not even a question. That's exactly what he's saying.
Okay.
I'm explaining what it means. You ask me technically, you want to know, he says clearly. All this is explicit here. This is not even a question.
Okay, good, fine. Thank you very much.
Vihine. So let's continue on page 1149. Just a second. Let me just see if it's worth going to the Tzadik Daled now. Let me see. You know something? I was going to continue here, but I see there's a whole Tzadik Daled explanation on all of this. So I lean toward going back there. It may, first of all, it helps review it. Secondly, it will add explanation to it all.
Wonderful. That's good.
The only thing is, it's quite lengthy. It's not short until he gets back. But we have to do it now. If we don't do it now, later it will be even more complicated. Okay, so let me lay this out right now. The Ayin Beis is now going to move and says, I'll just read one line to show you the context. He says like this. V'hine lepomim mavur, the b'chinas ha'ayin shal yesh amitu b'chinas er ha'seviv, v'ayin shal yesh aniver b'chinas er de malakalam. So sometimes it's explained that these 2 levels of ayin we've been discussing, the higher one is seviv and the second one is mamala, kalam. And now he's going to go on to explain at the lower level these 2 levels of ayin. What I'm choosing to do now, which I think makes sense, if we're going to learn Tzadik Daled, now's the time, is to go back on this, everything we just explained, the breakdown of the ayin into 2 levels, this channel. I'm just calling it a channel of a field of energy at this point. The 2 levels of divine energy. One is essentially as I said, Etzema, the core essence, which has essentially atzmusdika properties because it's reflecting them. And one already is mixed in with what Atzmus wants, which is the product. So it's already getting, assuming and connecting to the product. And they're not a contradiction, obviously, because they're both coming from the same source. It's just like two stages in the process. Like I've explained in everything, in any production, you're going to have these stages. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, in the year 1933, Tafresh Sadik Dalet, Rosh Hashanah, delivered and wrote his discourse that year, based on Ayin Beis, actually quoting word for word and then explaining it. So I'm going to do now, and I'm saying this for those that are not familiar with this parallel, those that have come later or just joining now this class. So there's a second text. If you go to ayinbeis.com, you'll see there's the text that's called Ayin Beis, and we just learned page 1148, 1147 through 1149. So we're now going to learn the parallel of that, of 1147 through 1149 in the Frierdiker, the son of the Rebbe Rashab. And this is called 5694. The text is there again, ayinbeis.com. You can follow if you like, or I will read and explain everything, so you won't miss out on anything.
That was before he went to Poland, right?
He was in Poland, I think, then.
Before that also?
It's 1933. You tell me, I don't know. What year did he go to Foxco? Anyway, you have to look it up. I'm not sure. I'm almost sure it was in, it was in Warsaw. He delivered these Maimorim in Warsaw, Poland.
He probably left Russia about 1928, 29, right after he got out of the...
Well, we know that. He left right after Simchas Torah, Tofresh Peches. So 1927, actually. October 27, he left Russia.
Yeah.
Never to return. And then 1920, it went from there to
Riga.
To Riga, which is Latvia, and then he went to Warsaw. So this was delivered in 1933 in Warsaw. It was not easy times, as you can imagine. It was right when the Nazis were coming to power. But let's get back to the Maimer here. If you go on chassidussupply.com, I have a whole overview of the discourses of 1933, Tafresh Sadik Daled, in context of the events that were going on in the world at the time. You know, I speculated there that perhaps because the world was going to be turned over in such a drastic way, in a horrible way for the Jewish people especially, that the Frierdiker Rebbe was going into the depths and depths of what existence is exactly, in a sense, back to the engine room to, so to speak, hold on to the very wires that define existence. That's what I speculated. But let's go back here. So what we're going to do now, we've been doing it all along, so we're already moved along. We're going to go to page 51 in Tafresh Sadik Dalet, which was later printed in a Sefer Maimorim Tafshin Yud Aleph. Not to confuse matters. So if you have the Sefer, it's called Tafshin Aleph because the Rebbe printed it in 1951. But it was delivered in 1933. And we're going to go to page 51, chapter 15. Now, we learned everything till here. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is now, what we're going to do now, page 51, for quite a few pages. So, but we will get back to the two levels of Ayin and Ayin Beis when we're done with this. This is going to be an elaborate discussion on these two levels of Ayin, especially on the whole concept of Ratzon, desire. Because remember again, Oyer is higher than desire. Oyer is just a reflection of the source. Ratzon emerges in Oyer. So that's the logic of it, because Ratzon is already a defined desire. I want something. Even if it's a Ratzon kloli, even if I say I just want to have a home, or I want to create art, it's also a what we call a tziyur. It has something. It's art. It's a home, and not that you want to dance. So it's defined by something. So even though it is a very all-encompassing desire, like we said, it's a makiv, but it has some form. Whereas oyer, if you think of oyer, it's just a reflection. All it is an extension, a reflection that carries the power of the divine into reality as we will ultimately know it. Yeah. But keep in mind, as I've said a number of times, everything pre-tzimtzum is all reflection of what the divine source wants. Post-tzimtzum begins a true independent consciousness. Now there's no independent consciousness. It's all in the same one consciousness. There's just levels, less not revealed, yes revealed, more wanting it closer to the product, farther from the product, but there's no product and there's no identity of a product. It's all within the source. That's why in general, everything pre-tzimtzum is really called encompassed in the source. But there in self, there's levels. It would be like the difference, sometimes explains the difference. I think we're going to learn it in Sadi Dalet. The difference between thought and speech within yourself. You haven't spoken yet. So you have the person, you have the thought of the person, so you're aware of it, but it's all within you. Then that thought says, I want to share something. You haven't shared it yet. That's like a shir atzmei b'koach. Inside of you, you've prepared whatever is going to be necessary for whatever it is that you're going to share. But there's no independent entity yet until you actually allow another entity to come into your proximity. So basically, within the source itself, like we speak about the artist, there are states where the artist is not even an artist. And then he becomes artist. In art itself, it could just be very general. Then it could be, I want to create art. What type of art? Infinite types of art. And then he chooses and prepares himself and chooses one type of art. And then will prepare himself to produce that. And this is all pre-tzimtzum. This is all pre-gilui, like he says, kodem. It's all pre the actual production process. But you can't say a process hasn't begun. It's just a process within the etzem, so to speak. So now we're going to learn this in Tzadik Daled. That's how I refer to it. Tzadik Daled simply means 94 in Hebrew, referring to the year 5694, corresponding to 1933. Okay, so page 51, it's chapter 15. If you want the flow is the same flow as Ayin Beis. That before this, he spoke about the yesh, and the Ayin Be'emtza, the three levels. And now he's going to go and break it down. So this corresponds again, 51 till approximately page 83. But there's breaks because it's not straight pages. There's at least 10, 15 pages that are not part of this. So is all pages 1147 through 1149. Okay. So here we go to Tzadik Dalet. I'll point out what is actual quote from Ayin Beis and what the Friedrich Rebbe adds. So the beginning, the first 15 lines is all Ayin Beis. So it's word for word from page 1147. So it says like this, with a few small modifications. V'hinei, and now, ha'ayin shu ha'mamutza ben yesh amiti v'yesh hanivra. This ayin, this channel, this selfless channel, this shapeless channel, ayin, that is the interface between the yesh amiti, the essence of true and absolute reality, what we call atzmus, the yesh hanivra, the created reality, created yesh existence, yadua, it's known, shu nechlach l'shtayim. This channel, this ayin, this like transitionary space, it could even breaks down into two or divides into two. V'hainu, the b'chinas ha'ayin k'moshu m'b'chinas yesh amiti, is the ayin as it emerges or as it reflects the yesh amiti, the true absolute reality. Lo yizeh ha'ayin nasa mokel yesh hanivra. Not this level of ayin, as it stands in its own pure form, becomes a source for the created yesh, for the product. Because this ayin, even though it's not the core essence, but even as it stands in this state, it's just a reflection of the essence. That's all it is. So it's not be'erech, it's not commensurate, it's not proportionate to the yesh klal at all. Liyas mokerei love, to be defined as a source to it. As remember we discussed that the creation process is the way God wanted it to be, as logical and rational as possible. So as soon as you see something that's very apart from another, you can say in no way that created this, because there has to be progressive diminishment, so to speak, progressive levels that will bring that energy to here. It would be like someone trying to pour out of a big barrel of wine into your cup to make kiddush. It won't work. But that would mean, if you're a real magician, maybe, if you're really a real craftsman, if you're really adept at it. But what you do is the barrel goes into a pitcher or into a bottle. The bottle then is more commensurate to the cup. This is the logical way how things work. So the same thing, just as a small example. So as much as possible, because we want to have an interface, a relationship, both from the top down and bottom up, it's done in a way where we can make sense of it. So the ayin of the Yesh Amiti is so intense and so consumed with its source, you cannot call it that alone is going to be the direct creative energy of the specific, of the Yesh itself. Asher al kain, and therefore, and this is the reason that the ayin divides into two. Another dimension emerges from it. That means that there are two levels in this ayin, in this, let's call it channel, transitionary channel, in this process. Ha'echad, the first ayin, it's an ayin as it is in relation to the source, the true yesh, the true absolute reality, atzmus. V'nikra ayin amiti, and that's called ayin amiti, like yesh amiti, ayin amiti, because it's a reflection of the yesh amiti, but it's not a yesh; it's bottled to the yesh amiti. Ayin Beis, the second level of ayin, the way it becomes, this energy, this divine energy, becomes a source now for the created yesh, for the product. Now, what causes such a distinction? It's precisely because it's oir and not etzem. That's what he's going to explain now. Because you could say, one second, if the ayin amiti cannot directly produce and create the product because it's too distant, so what does it come to accomplish? Atzmus is also beyond. That's what we said earlier. That's why Atzmus uses oir. Oir is Atzmus' way of relating. So what does ayin amiti accomplish that the yesh amiti can't, so to speak? I should correct myself. Of course, the yesh amiti can. He's doing it through the ayin amiti. But what is the ayin amiti? What is it introducing? So he's going to say, because precisely the thing it did, it transferred from etzem and built the mitzias nimtza to oir. That's its only contribution. Everything else is reflective of its source. But what it did was that showed the power of atzmus to manifest in some form of a mitzias nimtza. And because it's oir and not etzem, he's going to say now that's why it's subject to levels. So v'sibas is chalkas ha'ayin, even though frankly later, one second. Oh, okay. Yeah. I have an example I want to share. I think it'll help as well. But let me first read. So he says, so what's the cause for this distinction? This is chalkus between two levels of ayin. He says, ayin huliyas the bechlolus, the klolus b'chinas ayin hu oyer v'lei atzmi. The general ayin, this channel, this process, the general level is oyer. It's not atzmi. Even though the higher level of oyer is etzema oyer, but it's etzem of oyer. And it relates to the atzmi, it reflects the etzem, but itself it's oyer. But oyer, hini hageder shaloi, and oyer, its domain, its geder, its what's the word geder?
Limitations.
No, I don't want to say limitation. Doesn't mean it's limitation. Geder means
Boundary.
its identity. It's domain.
Definition.
What?
Definition.
Definition or its parameter. Geder is more of definition.
Boundary.
Something like that, yeah. Who the kol mashu nimshach v'nispashet. So more it transmits and extends the madrega from level to level, umebchina lebchina is also from state to state. It gets diminished in this transmission. That's his geder. That's what Eir is. Oh, you know something? By the way, we learned this already. I have to say we learned this already.
You did, for sure.
Yeah, because now he goes to Etzem HaNefesh, and he goes back to the Avuka. So I already learned this when we learned this part we learned. I didn't realize that. But the truth is I'm going to skip. I'm going to not learn it right now. I'm going to go to page 52. Now that I'm reading it, now I remember. We learned all this already. In Tzadik Daled. Okay. I know it doesn't hurt to learn again, but there's no reason to go over it again because we have it in recording and so on. Okay. So, okay, fine. We know what we're learning. So let me just tell you what he says afterwards. Then the Frierdiker Rebbe explains he gave an example for this, that a atzmi, like the nefesh, which is chai be'etzem, its life force is an equalizer. It doesn't get diminished from the head to the toenail. That's what he said. And just like there's the same nefesh can give power, can energize a giant, a child that energizes a giant, there's also no difference. So we see from this that a atzmi does not divide into structure. I'm just summing up what he says. But Oyer, on the other hand, does. When you talk about a reflection, the energy of something, its reflection, that does, and he gives the example of the Ayin Beis example of the Oyer Avuka, the flight of a torch. Okay, so we already learned the beginning of basically 1147. The bottom of 1147, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going now, moving to page 52. Sorry about that. So the last thing he says, so I'll just read the letter. That's a light, an energy, as great as it may be. Like he gives the example of a light of a torch. It's not similar when you're close to it. Then it's an intensity, it's intense. And when you're berichuk mismayet air, when you go away, the air gets diminished. And the same thing is with the way divine energy above, the be'inyan hamshachos mismayet air. That the matter of its transmission, it diminishes. This doesn't mean that air itself, there are elements in it that it retains always that it's a reflection of the source. That's why he says the be'inyan hamshachos mismayet air. I just saw that diuk right now. The Frierdiker Rebbe adds the inyan hamshachose. In Ayin Beis it just says b'hamshachose. The hamshachose mismayete says b'inyan hamshachose, which adds that as light is subject to its extension, that's where it gets diminished. But it always will remain me'ena etzem. It will always be a reflection of its source. But yet it gets diminished, meaning it moved to a lower level. Okay. The question you could ask is, well, based on what we learned in Ayin Beis, the energy, the second level of ayin, the oir, that shaykh le'elamis, that relates to existence in some manner. In contrast to the etzem ha'er, that all it is a reflection of its source, would the oir that shaykh le'elamis have less me'ein hamoyer than the oir that is reflecting its source? So I would argue no. Because why is it relating to existence? Not because it has become more ego or more identity, it's still oir. The only reason it's becoming relating to existence because that's what the instructions of the Atzmus are. So Atzmus basically has two instructions. One is be an oir that just reflects me. Another, be an oir that begins to relate to existence and a desire, a general desire, a specific desire, a preparing and allocating desire, etc. So the case would be made, and this is how I would say, based on the Rebbe's letter I cited yesterday, that these are all, because that's what Atzmus wants. From the point of view of Oir, it's just fulfilling what the source wants. The only difference is that one fulfills that desire, the source's interest, by being a pure reflection and not having anything within it that relates to anything else. All you are is my light. You're just reflecting who I am, and therefore it's an atzmi. It doesn't reveal. It's not hamshacha. Just like the atzmi is removed, this oir in a way is removed, but it's oir already.
But it's diminished.
And the second level of oir, it's following the instruction that now it has to begin to relate to existence. And they're both two parts of one ayin. So there's basically, they're both me'ein hamoyer. So in quality, they both serve the source. That's what oir does. But if you talked about it in quantity, I don't mean quantity as in number, as in quantity, but I mean as in describing what they do. One does something like we said. One is kamoya etzem, and one is mina etzem. One is reflecting exactly what the essence is, meaning something shapeless and defined and undefined and completely seamless. And the other is also a reflection of what God wants, but it's a reflection that already relates to something. So not the oir does not become more yesh. That doesn't say anywhere. The oir becomes more relationship with something other than atzmus, something that's not godly in its reflective ability. It's going to relate to creating a yesh.
So quantitative, not qualitative, basically.
Yes, I think that also is hinted to in the words the be'inyan hamshachase. In Ayin Beis, he said the hamshachase mismaiter. As it transmits, it gets diminished. Friedrich Rebbe adds the word the be'inyan hamshachase, meaning in the element of its transmission, it's diminished. It's not a contradiction. He's explaining what the Rebbe Rashab says with an extra word.
Is the oil a atzmi or the oil is not a atzmi anymore?
This is, to me, semantics. Explain the word atzmi and I'll answer. Didn't he say there's two levels, atzmi and hispashtus and etzema er? So the second level is called hispashtus compared to etzema. And I just explained the difference. Because one, all it is reflection of the source. There's nothing else involved. The other one is the source as it's reflecting in connecting to existence. So if compared to after the tzimtzum, everything before the tzimtzum is called Eir HaKol Batzmusay, and therefore a type of atzmi. Before the tzimtzum, if you break it down, these are the levels that he's describing here. Okay. Good. So now, remember, this topic is not over because remember, they're both levels of ayin. That means at some point, they're both oir. And even though it breaks into two, this does not mean one becomes not oir. God forbid to say that. We're not even talking about the koyach hagvul here. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about, you could even say, it's all oir here. It's not yet a keli. There's no yesh. There's no keli. It's all the oir. There will be also an oir hagvul or a koyach hagvul that is not discussed here at all. That's not relevant to this discussion because here he's talking about yesh, ayin, and yesh. So it's a state of ayin. The difference is one relates and one is still unrelated. And there's a reason for that. It's not because the oyer has wandered off, God forbid, from its agenda. That's exactly the kavanah. In the interface, God wants to give off two energies. I'll just use, I said I was going to give an example. Let me give an example that I wanted to add into this whole equation. I mentioned the other day that for a relationship to happen, there have to be two entities that are capable of having a relationship. Even if you don't have an actual relationship with someone, let's say a marriage. So there's years and years a person goes as a child and grows into an adult that they've not found their soulmate. And they live their lives. But their identity, their very psyche of the person is one created that it needs a relationship, is capable of a relationship. It's just you have to come to the point in life when you're ready for it, when you're mature enough to have a relationship. A 2-year-old can have a little 2-year-old friend, but it's not a full relationship. But a human being is capable of a relationship because that's how we're wired. So actualizing the relationship is not the same thing as being capable of a relationship. So when you say that atzmus on his own, if you purely atzmus, mitziusim atzmuse, built a mitzius nimtze, mechuyev mitzius, someone would ask you, does that have a relationship with anything? No. By definition, by the etzem by definition is beyond relationships. I'm using a different language a bit, but it may be a little easier to make it understand. But God wants a relationship. Why? Nesava Kadosh Baruch. We don't have a why, but that's what he desires. And we don't even call it a rotzen. Something in the atzmus of atzmus is nesava. Sava Kadosh Baruch lias leidira b'tachtein. Wants a relationship. But again, want not as an rotzen of a shape, it's a atzmizdike expression, so to speak. So to do so, we talked about the yechelis. The yechelis would be God having the capacity to have a relationship, and the relationship begins with something. If you want it to be logical and rational, it has to be something that relates to God. If you say God's going to have a relationship, let's say you're going to have a relationship with a blade of grass, there's nothing in common. So the way God manifests himself is in Oyer. Oyer is capable because Oyer is already not the Etzem. But on the other hand, it reflects everything about the Etzem. So essentially, it's the perfect representative of Atzmus. Then you need the second half. You need the other to have a relationship with. So the Oyer has another dimension in it, which is going to relate to bringing into being a Yesh Amiti. And these two levels of Oyer, they're both, as I said, they're both the divine, they're both driven by the divine essence. They have no agenda of their own, except one remains so-called the chief of staff. You stay with me and you reflect what I want. The other one will go out into the field and is also my shliach and my messenger and my oyer. But his function, that part of the oyer's function is to actually apply himself and begin to the process of a creation. Now, there are going to be other forces at work here. I mentioned koyach hagvul, tzimtzum, which is all going to create an actual other identity. This is all from God's point of view. The ayin, both levels of ayin for that matter, except the lower level of ayin relates to whatever is going to be the creation. And the higher level of ayin relates to what Atzmus is all about.
For what purpose the Atzmus needs the higher level? Let him go directly to the second level. The whole purpose is the Oilames.
Let me ask anybody can answer that question. I've answered that question maybe 40 times.
So we can climb up the ladder.
Exactly. Go ahead, say it. I'd rather you say it now.
No, I mean, we need different levels all the way up to the highest level so we can step by step get up there.
Exactly.
But the second level is not coming from the first level. It's coming directly from the Atzmus.
Can anybody answer that question? Nobody? Really?
Every level is hamshacha, is passus, and a mute. A from B to C to C to D. You've said it several times.
Are you answering the question that was asked?
I thought so. He said his question was that the second level comes directly from Atzmus. That would mean the etzema or comes directly from Atzmus, and the or that's in hamshacha also comes directly from Atzmus. But what we've learned is that the or comes as it extends. There's a miyut, so it comes out that it's ilu v'olu.
I know you lost me. I don't even know what you're saying right
Okay,
now.
I'm sorry. I won't answer any more questions. Good.
No, you're saying things that are interesting things, but I don't see any language here. Ilu v'olu. Where'd you get ilu v'olu here? Okay.
Even if he didn't mention ilu v'olu, it is a step-by-step progression of miyut.
But he mentioned the word ilu v'olu?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. I don't exactly where. I'll keep go back and look, but
Anyway, I'm not really understanding your question. After all we learned, I'm not sure what you're asking. What's your question? Can you explain what you're asking? Hello? Okay. The questioner wants to explain what he asked, or we move on? Okay, fine.
No,
So,
let me explain myself. Since both dargas, the darga of oil that is the only expressing Atzmus, nothing else, and the other darga of oil that is like, I don't know how to call it, the beginning, that from this is coming the Amshachol Olames, since both of them are coming directly from the Atzmus. So what is the oil, the first darga that is not reflecting only Hashem? What is this adding? Why is there a need for that?
you don't know the answer?
No, I don't. I heard what everyone said before, that is the Seder. First is going this, then you have a diminishing.
You never heard from me an explanation for this? Of all the
Maybe I
classes?
did, but I don't have an answer now.
I don't know what to say. I mean, I'm literally saying something I said, I can't tell you how many times. It's like the whole essence of this whole discussion. Did you hear what Tzvi said about the climbing of a ladder, step by step?
Right, but
So don't you understand that the ayin that reflects Atzmus is a necessary step? You can't skip a step, because then you don't have a reflection of Atzmus in his pure essence.
So that means it goes through the first ayin. It's not coming
What do you
directly.
think? Of course, the first ayin comes first. It's all one extension. There's no two different realities here. There's Atzmus built to Mitzias Nimtza. There's Atzmus Etzema Eir, which is a reflection of built to Mitzias Nimtza. There's Eir HaShayach LaElemis that begins to relate to what's the product.
So this is not Nimshach directly from the Atzmus. That's what bothers.
Of course it's directly from Atzmus. Everything's from Atzmus. There's nothing. God is only one God.
I thought that directly means that it's nothing in between. Okay.
I'm not sure what you just even said, but fine. Okay, look.
Fine.
I would suggest if someone has questions, what you're asking is so directly what we discussed so at length. That's why I'm a little surprised. I feel actually disappointed in myself. Because if you could ask this after everything I said, I don't know, then what I said was like a waste of time. You know, I mean,
no,
it's
not. What should I do?
No, you're allowed to ask, but I'm saying to myself, what did I not say? That this has been the essence of the discussion here from beginning to end. Okay, fine. Okay, I was going to begin at page 52, but it's already basically 10:30. Okay, let me just sum it up and we'll stop here. What we're going to learn is the way the Frierdiker Rebbe, son of the Rebbe Rashab, explains the bottom of page 1147 through 1149. And that is that we're going to understand this whole process of the two levels of ayin. One that reflects the essence, and one that relates to existence through understanding Ratzon. It's going to enter the concept of Ratzon, desire. Ratzon, as I said, is already a level in the Oyer. And we'll learn a little later, as we already learned, that there's levels in the Ratzon and the desire. But the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to bring what the Rebbe Rashab cites from the Maimorim in volume 1. Frierdiker Rebbe is actually going to cite also from volume 1 in Ayin Beis, because he wants to develop and elaborate on it all. Let me just say again and again and again, you're never going to understand these concepts if you try to think about Lifnei Tzimtzum and think about it in a technical way, because there's no technicalities here. This is all conceptual. The only way to begin to appreciate this is if you can find an example in your life, some example that we can relate to and understand the example well. I know everybody is impatient and wants to understand the nimshal before the mashal, but there's a reason you give examples. If you can jump straight, you talk about jumping. If you could jump straight to Atzmos, it would be great, but you can't. You need examples. And the examples actually help us really internalize it. So I've given an example of an artist. I've given the example of a chief of staff. I've elaborated on the example that he uses here, building a home. So when you have a question, why don't you just go to the example and try to figure out where to place it in the example. The Frierdiker Rebbe gave another example of Etzem HaNefesh and the Chayes and Hispashtus HaChayes and Etzem HaChayes, the two levels that the soul energizes. So try to look into the example and see what you don't understand in the example. This is what I'm giving you as a little instruction of how to learn. You have to understand, if you don't understand the example, you're never going to understand the nimshal. I can tell you that as a guarantee. There's no way. It's impossible. Because these are not things we can touch. These are all things we're being told. No one can travel before the tzimtzum. Pre-tzimtzum, there's no existence. If there was existence, you wouldn't need a tzimtzum. The tzimtzum allows for us to be able to sit here and talk about this and learn Ayin Beis. So there's no way we can understand pre-tzimtzum unless you find examples. So you can memorize these words and repeat them. Listen, I know people who are 5 years old and they have a great memory. You can give them, they can read this 25 times, and then they'll come back and tell you word for word what it says here. But if you ask them to explain it, they will have no idea what it says. So find that example. We have examples we've used. And try to, in examples, see what's missing. I used examples for what etzem is, for ayin atzmi, for ayin oir hamispashet, and then for the yesh hanivra. These are 4 stages that we've been discussing. There's more to come. I tried to my best of my ability to explain it with many different examples. And again, if you want to understand it well, you're going to have to understand the examples well, and most importantly, review it again and again and again. I know you want me to do the work for you, but you're going to have to read it yourself. Read it inside again and again and again. And if you really want to get it, explain it to somebody else. If you can explain this to someone else, you'll be in fine shape. If you can't, what does that tell you? That you haven't internalized it yet. That you're not there yet. That's not a critique. It's part of the process. We talk about climbing the ladder, right? It's climbing. I'm not surprised that it's difficult to understand these ideas. Of course they're difficult. To understand Bilta Metzias Nimtza, to understand Oyer, that's not a Metzias, but it's not Atzmos. How do you explain that? It needs a lot of thought. So I'm just suggesting that there's no shortcuts. So we went over it again and again. I tried to explain it to the best of my ability. I'm happy to take questions. I'm just trying to give you the tools to really internalize it, because I can't do it for you. I can do my best I can do is internalize it myself and try to explain it. So Adarabbi, you all have families, you all have spouses, you have children. Why don't you sit them down for 10 minutes and say, I'd like to explain to you an idea I learned in Ayin Beis today. See how well you can explain it. And that alone will tell you where you're at. And that means you should go back or review it, which is all recorded, and you could, until you finally get it. It's going to take time. These are not simple ideas. I'm telling you right now. It's not like, there's nothing that's been said here that I think is going to be easy. It's not easy stuff if you really want to understand it. But it is going into the deepest kishkis, into the guts of how something comes from the deepest place of a core essence into finally a final product. And you no problem using the human example of an artist or whatever it is that you do. Anything that you're good at starts somewhere in your core essence and then slowly, slowly makes its way until it becomes a final product. Figure out all the steps based on this. And you'll see, you'll get a deeper sense of it, of what the essence of somebody is and what their expression is. I'll just say one example. If your wife or your spouse or anyone you love dearly says something to you, right? Let's say it's something that disturbs you, or it's something that you don't fully understand. Now, let me ask you, is it coming from their essence, or is it just a matter of speech? It's a good question, right? So that alone already makes you start thinking about a human being that's talking to you, or someone you care about. Where is it coming from? What they're saying is, it's super. They tell you go buy a carton, a bottle of milk. Obviously, there's not necessarily expression of etzem nefesh. But if it's a deeper thing, someone's really deep desire, someone's really deep hope, or something, it's a good exercise to figure out how deep does it go, and how did it get from that deep place all the way to here. This is part of this process. It's just one way of doing it a little more psychologically. Anyway, these are my words of inspiration here. So we'll do tomorrow, we'll begin from top of 52, page 52. We're going to get into the Rotzen to understand this whole concept of Oir. Okay. Anybody